Welcome to Staff Works Explained. Are you here for the first time? Please consider subscribing to this channel. Also, hit the notification bell so that when you upload a new video, you are notified. You can also watch other videos that you have done on different topics. In today's video, we'll be talking about Nile River Basin Cooperative Framework Agreement, which has been ratified by the 6th country, and there is a possibility that it will enter into force in October 2024. In this video, we are going to look at what this means for the Nile Basin countries, the 10 Nile Basin countries. We'll also ask ourselves, can those countries that have not signed or ratified sit pretty? Can Kenya afford to continue sitting on the fence? Can Egypt and Sudan continue to oppose the treaty and still continue to enjoy the Nile water resources based on the treaties that were signed 100 years ago? What does the ratification mean for the Ethiopia dam guard? As we know, on July 8th, 2024, something that will have an impact on how Nile River resources are utilized, as well as provide a solution to the conflict that arose with the construction, filling, and operation of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam happened. The South Sudan announced that its parliament, which is Transitional National Legislative Assembly (TNLA), had unanimously ratified the Nile Basin Cooperative Framework (CFA). Perhaps you're asking yourself, what is Nile River Basin Initiative (CFA)? Nile Basin countries, which include, and in alphabetical order, we have Burundi, Democratic Republic of Congo (DRC), Egypt, Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, South Sudan, Tanzania, and Uganda, and then we have Eritrea, which sits as an observer country. From 1999, these countries, the Nile Basin countries, came up with Nile River riparian countries and came up with multilateral treaty designed to promote equitable and sustainable management of the Nile River water resources. The Nile Basin Initiative Cooperative Framework Agreement (CFA) seeks to establish a legal framework that allows all member countries to have fair access to and share the benefits of the Nile waters. It aims to replace historical agreements of 1909, 1929, and 1959, and all these treaties were unfairly made and favored downstream countries such as Egypt and Sudan, where they allocated themselves all the Nile water resources in total disregard of the upstream countries. To get a clear picture of the former treaties, let's delve into some history. During the scramble for Africa, Britain signed the 1902 treaty with Ethiopia, and then in 1929 it signed a treaty with Egypt, and these treaties set the rules of the game in the Nile, and these rules or these treaties prohibited upstream countries from utilizing the waters of River Nile without the consent of the downstream countries. After decolonization, Egypt followed in Britain's footsteps and concluded the 1959 agreement with Sudan, and this treaty effectively institutionalized the same power balance that was there during the colonial period. The agreement, that is the 1959 agreement, allocated the entire flow of the River Nile between Egypt and Sudan without considering the interest of the nine or so upstream countries. The treaty, that is the CFA, now aims at correcting this. It aims at fostering cooperation among upstream and downstream nations. With the finalization of the treaty, just like any other treaty, the process which happened in between 1999 and 2010, the instrument that is supposed to be signed to bind all the countries, NBA states or NBA member states are supposed to sign and also ratify. It first started with the signing, where in May 2010, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Uganda signed the opened CFA treaty in Entebbe, Uganda. Kenya and Burundi followed with Kenya signing in May 19, 2010, and February 28, 2011, Burundi signed. Egypt and Sudan refused to sign the CFA, primarily due to concerns over Article 14b, which states that Nile Basin states therefore agree, in the spirit of cooperation, not to significantly affect the water security of any other Nile Basin country. Egypt and Sudan argue that this clause threatens their historical water rights, as it could potentially allow upstream countries to use more water, thereby reducing the flow to downstream countries. They have long relied on the previous agreements that you have mentioned that guaranteed them of larger share of Nile's water resources, and see CFA as a challenge to their established water security. Instead, they proposed revising the article, that is Article 14b, to read as following: not to adversely affect the water security and current uses and rights of any other Nile Basin states. This revised wording would ensure that existing uses and rights are explicitly remain protected, reflecting their concern that the CFA could undermine their historical guaranteed water allocation. Other countries in the Nile Basin, however, rejected this proposed revision. They viewed the original wording of the Article 14b as the fair basis for equitable cooperation, and saw the proposed changes as potentially undermining the CFA objectives of achieving a balanced and cooperative management of the Nile resources. It was proposed that the contentious 14b, Article 14b, be placed as an appendix to the CFA, with the Nile River Basin Commission, which is an institution that is established by CFA, tasked with developing a compromised version of the article. This commission which would come up into operation once the CFA is fully ratified, was intended to address the concerns of all parties, working towards a mutually acceptable solutions within 6 months of its establishment. Despite these proposals, Egypt and Sudan maintained their stance against the CFA. They continued to express their concerns over the potential impact on their historical water rights, and remained firm in their demand for specific protections for their established uses and rights. Despite Egypt and Sudan maintaining their stance, this did not deter the Nile Basin countries. They proceeded to sign the treaty, moving forward with the CFA paving way for the next steps. The next steps in the CFA progression was the ratification process. This involves each signatory country formally approving the agreement through their national legislative or governing bodies. Ratification is a crucial step, as it ensures that the treaty is legally binding and recognized by the participating nations. Also, successful ratification is important because it will solidify a unified framework for managing Nile River resources, promoting cooperation and equitable sharing among all the basin countries. Ethiopia was the first country to ratify in June 13, 2013, followed by Rwanda in August 28, 2013, Tanzania in March 26, 2015, Uganda in August 15, 2019, Burundi in 2023, and finally South Sudan on 8th July 2024. Kenya is yet to ratify the treaty, despite having signed it in May 2010. CFA will now enter into force 60 days after at least 6 countries have ratified or acceded to the document, and also deposit the instrument with African Union as stipulated in the Article 42. This may happen on 6th October 2024. Countries that have not ratified the CFA, namely Kenya, Egypt, Sudan, and DRC, are not bound by its provisions and do not participate in the decision-making process of the Nile River Basin Commission. Their non-ratification limits their formal involvement in the new cooperative framework established by this treaty, affecting their ability to influence the management and allocation of the Nile River resources under the CFA. One question that is posed is why Kenya has not ratified the treaty, despite signing it when other countries were doing so. The delay in ratification can be attributed to several strategic, diplomatic, and as well as internal factors. There has been argument that Kenya is balancing its relations with upstream and downstream countries like in the Nile Basin. While it shares common interest with upstream countries like Ethiopia, Uganda, Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda, it also values its diplomatic relations with the two countries, Egypt and Sudan. Ratify the CFA could potentially strengthen these relations, particularly with Egypt, a country that buys a bulk of the Kenyan tea, one of the major forex earner for Kenya. Kenya may also see itself in a potential mediating role between the upstream and downstream countries. Ratifying the CFA in this case might limit its ability to act as a neutral party in negotiations or regional diplomacy efforts aimed at resolving the Nile water dispute. Kenya might also be adopting a strategic wait-and-see approach, observing how the CFA unfolds in terms of regional politics and economic implications. By not rushing to ratify the agreement, Kenya can monitor how upstream projects such as the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam (GAD) impact Nile Basin dynamics, as well as adjust its stance accordingly. Despite these delays, Kenya has demonstrated strong support for the CFA. At a recent Council of Ministers meeting in Kampala, Uganda, Kenya was represented by the Permanent Secretary for Foreign Affairs, and the minister or the Permanent Secretary expressed full backing of this framework, which is aimed at achieving immediate economic and social transformation in this region. If CFA enters into operation, it will be a useful tool in addressing some of the challenges in the Nile Basin management. However, its implementation faces significant challenges. Under international law, a treaty typically does not impose obligations or grants to countries that have not agreed to it. Since Egypt and Sudan refused to sign the CFA, it has no legal effect on these countries, and this complicates its practical application. The CFA is designed to manage Nile resources for both upstream and downstream countries, but implementing it without Egypt and Sudan, who are crucial downstream users, presents difficulties. Moreover, the CFA would create two overlapping institutions to the Nile River Basin Commission. There's the new Nile River Basin Commission, and NRBS, and there is existing Nile Basin initiatives. Article 30 of the CFA specifies that an Nile River Basin Commission would inherit the NBI's rights, obligations, as well as assets once the CFA becomes effective. This raises questions about how the rights and obligations of non-signatory states like Egypt and Sudan would be managed. Experts like Dr. Salman, M.A. Salman, and Professor McCarthy have highlighted potential legal complexities and disputes which may arise from this situation. Without Egypt and Sudan, the Commission might face challenges in performing its function. The CFA grants the Commission authority to make binding decisions on water use, which could affect how resources are shared. Given that the 1959 agreement already allocated all the available Nile water to downstream states, Egypt and Sudan, decision by the Commission could impact Egypt and Sudan negatively, making effective operation difficult in their absence. The CFA is a promising option for achieving comprehensive cooperation in the Nile Basin. However, its success depends on Egypt and Sudan agreeing to join the CFA. Both countries have previously opposed the CFA, but the current conditions might lead them to reconsider their stance. The situation today is different from when the negotiations were being done. There has been construction of a Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is almost being completed and is being filled for the 5th time and the last time this year. The GAD, which affects Nile water flow, could potentially influence Egypt as well as Sudan to support the CFA. Sudan is already in favor of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam due to its benefits, but Egypt remains worried about how it will be affected, or how its share will be affected. Egypt might, as experts see it, might be persuaded to accept the CFA if it can ensure that the CFA includes regulation of the guns that protects its interest. Ethiopia could help by agreeing to let the Nile Basin Commission oversee all the dams, including the GAD. This shared management could be a good compromise, as decisions by the Commission are made by consensus, which might be better to protect Egypt's interests compared to the situation where Egypt remains opposed. Egypt might also be motivated to accept the CFA to avoid unilateral actions by other countries, since Egypt cannot stop Ethiopia from building the GAD and even operating it. There's a risk that other upstream countries might also unilaterally develop the Nile River. As upstream states assert their rights, Egypt's vulnerability as a downstream country makes it necessary to cooperate and have this agreement in place. The CFA offers protections through equitable use, cooperative management, as well as binding dispute resolution, which could safeguard the downstream countries, especially Egypt. The ratification of the CFA by South Sudan is very crucial, as it solidifies the agreement implementation across the entire Nile Basin region. It ensures that all riparian states are involved in cooperative management. South Sudan participation would strengthen the CFA legitimacy as well as effectiveness. Egypt and Sudan can no longer maintain their opposition to the CFA is given. There's a lot that has happened in between, and these changes, including the construction of GAD, the ongoing conflict in Sudan, so all these have altered the regional dynamics, and these changes underscore the need for a revised and inclusive approach for Nile water management. For Kenya too, it cannot afford to sit on the fence. It must make a decisive commitment. Remaining indecisive due to fears of losing key trading partner or other repercussions is counterproductive. Kenya needs to actively support the CFA to help facilitate comprehensive and equitable resource sharing among all the Nile River basin countries. For effective management of the Nile resources, all countries must collaborate and base their agreement on the CFA. Shared responsibilities and cooperation are essential for achieving sustainable water use and as well as resolving existing disputes in the region. So we'll be at the lookout to see how this progresses. So thank you for reaching this far. If it's your first time here, please consider subscribing to this channel. Also hit the notification bell so that when you upload a new video, you are notified. You can also watch other videos that we have made, especially on the Grand Ethiopian Desert Dam, its operation, and also feeling and how this agreement will affect the operation of this dam. So thank you.